President Trump is set to sign his latest trade bill into law today, right after launching America's 250th anniversary celebrations in Iowa last night. In just a few moments, we're going to make official the greatest victory yet when I sign one big, beautiful deal, Trump announced proudly. But as fireworks lit up the sky over Washington, D.C., an even bigger spark was already prepared behind closed doors, an ultimatum from the White House, threatening to shake the global economy with a $1.3 trillion trade shock. For Canada alone, the consequences could be severe. Up to $62 billion worth of steel, aluminum, and auto exports are at risk of vanishing, all with a single press of a button. President Trump has rolled out a new tariff plan, ranging from 10% to 70% on goods from several nations. The policy kicks in on August 1st, unless those countries sign trade deals now or face the price hike later. In response, the United Kingdom and Vietnam rushed to sign agreements within 48 hours, hoping to escape the heavy blow. But Canada chose a different strategy. Prime Minister Mark Carney played it carefully, delaying just enough to strike at the right moment. His move could turn America's fireworks into thunderous echoes aimed right back at the White House. This could spark the most intense trade standoff in North America since NAFTA in 1994. In today's video, join 3 Daily News as we break down the hidden story behind Trump's aggressive tariff wave and see how Mark Carney's next countermove could send fresh tremors through the global financial system. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest reports. Just as Washington celebrated with fireworks, Ottawa made its first quiet move. On the night of June 30th, the Carney government canceled Canada's planned 3% digital services tax, which was aimed at tech giants like Amazon, Google, and Meta. This happened just hours before the tax was set to take effect. The decision immediately reopened talks with the White House, but Carney made it clear this wasn't a retreat, it was bait. Unlike London and Hanoi, who rushed to sign early deals, Carney refused to follow a fake deadline. He compared negotiating with Trump to playing chess against an opponent who keeps changing the rules. Canada, he said, must stay flexible but firm. After offering this small concession, Ottawa slowed down the technical negotiations. Meeting dates were postponed, paperwork expanded with new annexes, and the U.S. was forced to reveal more demands, ranging from electric vehicle quotas to battery supply chain controls. While Carney pulled Washington into a procedural trap, the White House used Twitter to boast about 2 new agreements: a 10% special tariff deal allowing 100,000 British cars into the U.S. each year, and a 20 to 40% tariff on Vietnamese goods aimed at stopping Chinese transshipments. Conservative media called it a double win for Trump, but experts quickly pointed out that these deals cover less than 1% of total U.S. imports, a symbolic victory more than an economic one. Meanwhile, Canada stayed quiet. In just 1 week, Canada's House of Commons held 3 private hearings about the Milk Fortress, Canada's supply management system for dairy products. This system uses tariffs of up to 300% to protect farmers in Quebec and Ontario. Facing pressure from the Farmers Alliance, lawmakers passed a bill to lock Canadian dairy protections out of any future trade deals. A U.S. trade advisor admitted this is now the biggest obstacle in talks, with no easy way out. The standoff quickly circled back to Washington. At dawn on July 11th, Trump responded by raising the planned tariff on Canada to 35%, warning it could go even higher if Ottawa keeps stalling. But Carney stayed cool, replying with hard facts. Canada buys $349.4 billion worth of American goods every year, more than Japan and Germany combined. If Trump decides to pull the trigger, Detroit and Chicago's supply chains will be the first to suffer. This is where Carney's quiet but resilient strategy comes into play. He extended Washington a small olive branch, just enough to look like a concession, while secretly building a legal defense tall enough to guard his most strategic industries: dairy green steel and EV batteries. Meanwhile, the pressure is building every day. Major U.S. businesses, especially big tech and Michigan's auto factories, are pushing back against Trump's threats. Inside the White House, the president is hunting for a quick political win before the August 1st deadline. So, the big question remains: will Trump back down, or will he push forward with the 70% tariff he threatened back in early July? And if Trump really goes through with it, what countermeasures will Canada unleash beyond the digital tax? The stakes are high because nearly 900,000 Canadian jobs are tied to the steel, auto, and aluminum industries. The decision will shape the future of North America's most ambitious trade deal since NAFTA in 1994, and it could turn this year's Independence Day celebrations into the first shots of a historic tariff war. But this isn't just about metals. Milk has become the new red line, and neither side seems willing to cross it. Canada's supply management system, including quota limits and import duties that soar over 300% on milk exceeding quotas, protects about 339,000 jobs, most of them in Ontario and Quebec. These two provinces alone decide the fate of 170 seats in the House of Commons. At that scale, every liter of milk isn't just breakfast for a Canadian child. It's a political lifeline for any prime minister who wants to stay in power. From Washington, President Trump calls Canada's dairy system a protectionist fortress, accusing Ottawa of choking U.S. farmers with outrageous triple-digit tariffs. He's demanding that Canada scrap its quotas, open at least 15% of its dairy market to U.S. milk, and warning that tariffs could shoot up to 70% if Canada refuses. On Truth Social, Trump keeps repeating the claim that Canada's milk tariffs are even tougher than the 2018 steel duties. His goal is obvious: break the last protective wall in North American agriculture while showing off a political trophy to Wisconsin voters just ahead of the midterm elections. But Ottawa has already set a trap. At dawn on August 8th, Canada's House of Commons passed Bill C-98, unanimously 289-0. The bill is known as the Supply Management Shield. It legally forbids any Canadian minister from negotiating quota increases or tariff cuts outside of the system. Just 3 days after the proposal landed in the Senate, Canada's lawmakers moved swiftly. The Senate gave it a rubber stamp approval, effectively sealing the deal. Reuters described the moment as a rare case of unanimous support, pushing the legislation through just in time, right before Parliament's summer recess. This strategic timing wasn't a coincidence. It was deliberate, locking the trade talks into place while U.S. negotiators scrambled for options. For the Oval Office, the Canadian vote wasn't just a setback, it was a full-force gut punch. Up until this point, Finance Minister Carney had dangled a small carrot. He offered negotiations on the digital services tax, giving Washington a minor win. But then, in the same breath, he slammed the dairy door shut, the very industry President Trump had been demanding Canada open for years. At that exact moment, Canada's Agriculture Ministry dropped a bombshell report. It warned that if Canada's strict dairy quotas were removed, the consequences would be severe and immediate. Milk prices could crash by 18% within just 3 months. Farmers could lose over 6 billion Canadian dollars in land and asset value. 72,000 jobs in dairy processing, from plants in Quebec City to factories in Toronto, could be wiped out in a domino effect. The message wasn't subtle. Ottawa was telling Washington, touch Canadian milk, and you're attacking our federal charter itself. In response, the Dairy Farmers of Canada launched a national campaign. The slogan, "Hands off our milk." Green and white protest signs started appearing everywhere, especially along Highway 401, one of Canada's busiest trade routes. The issue wasn't just about milk anymore. It had become a symbol of Canadian sovereignty. And across the border, at every Trump rally in Michigan, the political impact was felt. Milk had become a weaponized symbol, turning everyday dairy products into political grenades lobbed back at the White House. Now the U.S. administration faced a critical dilemma. Lower the tariffs? That would mean backing down to Carney, risking a revolt from America's rural voters, particularly in the Midwest. Go all in with the threatened 70% tariffs? That would provoke Canada into launching a $35 billion counterstrike, mainly targeting Detroit, which leads America's auto exports to Canada. Canada's retaliation would focus on steel and aluminum, two of Detroit's most vital materials. A senior White House advisor quietly told Reuters Carney, "Flip the whole table on us. We're paying twice, once in lost leverage and again in ripple effects across industries like Big Dairy, GM, and even Walmart." And that wasn't just talk. Behind closed doors, U.S. officials were panicking. If the dispute escalated, prices for cheese, canned goods, and car frames could skyrocket by as much as 50%. That's why, during America's Independence Day fireworks, Carney didn't flinch. He calmly folded his arms, let the deadline creep closer, and made Trump sweat. All without saying another word. With the C-98 trade shield now active, Canada had effectively driven the talks into a dead-end cul-de-sac. There were no easy ways out. To get a deal, America would need to back down first. To push harder, the White House would risk both an economic crisis and a political backlash. What started as a fight over dairy quotas had evolved into something much bigger. From a small policy called supply management, Canada had created a massive piece of global leverage, redirecting America's own 4th of July fireworks back toward the White House. Now, the Trump administration had to ask itself a brutal question. Is it really worth gambling a $1.3 trillion North American supply chain just to force Canada's dairy door open? The clock is ticking. There are just over 2 weeks left before the July 21st deadline, and the White House keeps hammering one figure into the media spotlight, 70%. That's the maximum tariff they've threatened, and they're not bluffing. On July 4th, during his Independence Day speech, President Trump announced his next move. He planned to send Ottawa an official letter outlining a 10 to 70% tariff framework set to take effect on August 1st, unless Canada agrees to his terms. This tactic isn't new. Trump's team already tested it on the UK and Vietnam, using similar pressure to get trade concessions. For North America's steel, aluminum, and auto industries, this is like setting a live explosive under the assembly line. Even a modest increase to a 50% steel and aluminum tariff back on June 4th was enough to rattle the markets. Reuters reported that Midwest hot-rolled coil prices shot up 22% in just 1 month, forcing construction companies and manufacturers to delay projects and postpone contract bids. And now, with a 70% tariff looming, the entire North American supply chain is staring down the barrel of something far worse. In the city of Oshawa, a major blow has just struck the auto industry. General Motors announced that it's eliminating one of its production shifts, forcing the company to lay off 700 workers. Even more concerning, GM is now diverting part of its exports back to the United States, a strategic shift that the automaker bluntly described as a mandatory response to America's new tariff wall. There was no sugarcoating this move. For GM, the trade war left no choice. Over in Windsor, the story isn't much better. Stellantis, another heavyweight in the auto sector, has decided to delay the launch of its Daytona RT line, adding to growing worries in Canada's manufacturing sector. Meanwhile, across the border in the United States, particularly in Michigan, state lawmakers received a grim warning. Economists told them that if things continue down this path, 13,000 jobs could disappear within the next 5 years. This job loss would deliver a major blow, draining an estimated $456 million USD from Michigan's state budget. For a region that relies heavily on cross-border manufacturing, this is nothing short of a disaster in the making. But while some might expect panic, Prime Minister Mark Carney is choosing a different path, a calculated countdown rather than a trembling reaction. In response to the crisis, Ottawa unveiled a major $6.5 billion Canadian fire-safe vault plan, which Carney presented to Parliament as a comprehensive emergency strategy. Here's how the package is broken down. 5 billion Canadian dollars will go toward helping exporters break into new global markets, reducing their dependency on the United States. $1 billion is allocated specifically to support agri-food businesses, keeping Canada's farms and food industries stable during this turbulent period. And $500 million will be offered as concessional loans, providing financial relief to industries that may struggle to adjust quickly. But there's more to this plan. According to insiders, about 4 billion Canadian dollars from this package are directly reserved for Ontario and Quebec's steel, aluminum, and electric vehicle battery hub. This isn't just about subsidies, it's a protective shield designed to save 30,000 factory jobs, especially when a looming 70% tariff threatens to shake the foundations of Canada's industrial heartland. At the same time, Canada's foreign ministry is busy setting up alternative routes to bypass the tariff barriers. Their strategy includes negotiating increased steel export quotas into the European Union, creating new outlets for Canada's core industries, restarting free trade negotiations with Japan, opening doors to one of the world's largest markets, and launching a UK-Canada Economic Working Group, scheduled for its first official meeting on June 15th to strengthen trade ties post-Brexit. But while Canada is working hard to diversify, Washington is not remaining idle. On July 10th, President Trump took the battle to a political level. He accused 11 out of Canada's 13 provinces of deliberately sweeping U.S. goods off supermarket shelves, fueling tensions further. Trump also threatened to widen the scope of sanctions, adding softwood lumber, beef, and pharmaceuticals to the list. This messaging is clearly aimed at rural American voters, many of whom are already frustrated by Canada's closed dairy market. Now, seeing beef and lumber dragged into the trade dispute, they're becoming even more resentful. According to Georgetown-based lobbyists, if the tariffs extend to pharmaceuticals, the consequences could be enormous. Staying true to his word, the Commerce Ministry announced Diversify 2025, a proactive trade policy initiative. Here's what it includes. Canadian companies will be able to automatically increase their EU export quotas by 15% when U.S. tariffs strike, giving them a fast-track way to shift exports. Canada will also eliminate domestic duties on key components imported from ASEAN countries under a new free trade agreement process that officially began on July 10th. With these moves, Canada is signaling that while it won't provoke a trade war, it also won't stand still while its economy is targeted. The message is clear. Canada is ready to fight back, but with strategy, not panic. The chain reaction is instant. The loonie drops 1.4%, but Rio Tinto Canada's shares surge after Ottawa hints at injecting new capital to shield against soaring U.S. aluminum prices. On the labor side, Unifor warns that if the 70% tariff becomes reality, the Windsor-Detroit-Oshawa Golden Triangle could lose 45,000 jobs within 3 quarters. That's enough to push Ontario into a technical recession. As a result, the trade clock ticks louder by the hour. To strike a deal before July 21st, Washington faces a tough choice. Either ease up and accept minimal concessions from Ottawa, or pull the 70% trigger, risking a double recession that drains jobs from both Detroit and Windsor. Mark Carney is staking his entire reputation on the word steadfast because he knows that surviving July 21st buys Canada time. Time to build new free trade corridors, using the tariff threat as leverage to restructure supply chains beyond Washington's control. And if Canada succeeds, the 70% warning might backfire on President Trump, right as election season heats up. Today, the line between brute force and strategic patience has never been clearer along the 49th parallel. Trump's 70% tariff isn't just about steel, aluminum, or autos. It's an attack on the very resilience of an ally that has stood by America for over 2 centuries. At the same time, Mark Carney's quiet but unshakable response sends a cold message. If you try to bring Canada down, be ready to pay the price in America's own supply chain. If Trump wins, other nations will learn to sign deals quickly just to survive, and Capitol Hill will get a new playbook for hardball trade tactics. But if Ottawa stands its ground, the White House may have to admit that tariffs, even extreme ones, are no match for a long-term precision strategy. That's why July 21st won't just pick a winner. It will determine whether the U.S.-Canada economic alliance survives through diplomacy or collapses under tariff-driven pressure. What's your take on Trump's strategy? Drop a comment below and subscribe to 3 Daily News so you don't miss our next big story on the global political economy.